And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. The Justin Fields news is not going away anytime soon. Shayne, we're going to talk about how the odds just skyrocketed up for Steelers to land him. And we're going to talk about weighing Justin Fields compared to the other quarterback options the Steelers could potentially obtain this offseason. We're also going to break down the next wave of roster moves that could be coming for Pittsburgh. So let's start things off, Shayne, with the news today. And that is 3 players have been released by the Steelers early this week. Quarterback Mitch Trubisky, offensive tackle Chukwuma Okorafor, and punter Presley Harvin III. These moves were expected. We didn't know that they would come this soon. I'm glad that they're kind of just getting ahead of the game right now.
Yeah.
We didn't know if that would wait until closer to free agency, what have you. But all 3 of these moves, I think, were expected. The first 2 for financial reasons, because you could not justify going into the 2024 season with Trubisky as your QB3 and the cap hit that he was about to have. And then Okorafor, I want to talk about here in a second. But he also had a very large cap number because of that contract, the extension the Steelers gave him during the 2022 offseason. We'll spend some time talking about that in a second. And then Presley Harvin was not contract related at all. His contract was dirt cheap as a 7th round pick, but the performance was just awful this year. And so we knew that they couldn't return with him as the punter going forward into next season. So what do you make of these decisions so far, Shayne?
Like you said, most of these, especially the first 2, were going to have to happen, right? Like Trubisky, You can't keep on this team between his level of play on the field when he's been able to play for us and just the cap hit. Like you said, he's going to be the 3rd quarterback, most likely, regardless of who is brought in to compete with Kenny. If there is someone, like, we kind of know the book on him at this point, right? So he was going to be done. Okorafor, you would have liked to be able to maybe get something for, but the way his season ended, where he was benched for stuff that we don't know exactly the details on, like, I think that probably made some teams wary of him. And also his cap hit, while isn't huge for a semi-starting right tackle, is still big enough where teams probably just said, you know what, if you want to get rid of him, you're gonna have to cut him. So they did. And then Harvin, unfortunately, as much as we would have loved to see him turn out, you just cannot be that inconsistent as a punter in the league when there's so much roster turnover at that position usually.
Yeah, and it's funny how they phrase this too for Trubisky, like, "Oh, we decided to mutually part." It's like,
yeah, I'm sure
you didn't have a choice in the matter. I mean, you were going to go, and probably what happened is the Steelers did him the courtesy of saying, "Hey,
yeah,
are you willing
like
to,
he wants to leave too,"
and
yeah.
So it's, I mean, he wasn't coming back either way. Like it was one of the 3 easiest salary cap decisions I outlined for the Steelers in an earlier article. The Okorafor one is interesting, Shayne, because he's a 27-year-old tackle, I believe, at this point, that with 4 years of experience. He just absolutely tanked his trade value. I think the Steelers kind of did that. And I feel like, I know that Okorafor is not good. I think he should be somebody's swing tackle, but
ideally,
good tackles are hard to come by. And I think that it was at some point, at least before the benching and essentially never seeing the field again, it was reasonable to think the Steelers could have flipped him for like a 5th or 6th round pick. 5th, maybe is a little bit on the high end, but he was on. So the Steelers will pay his guarantees, but he would have had a base salary this coming year of $4.75 million. Like, that's really, really cheap for a tackle with 4 years of starting experience. And so somebody would want him. I like him or not, like, Chris Hubbard is still floating around the league. Like, these guys are valuable.
He would be an upgrade for some teams. He would, like, and that's not saying that he would be like this huge upgrade, but I mean, look at the Jets tackle situation last year and the Titans. Like, there's probably teams he could have gone to and been a positive influence on the play of their offensive line. Not that he was maybe worth being like a long-term starter, like we were hoping he would be when they signed the contract for him. But again, this is this guy that is still relatively young. Like, he's played a lot, but he hasn't, been in the league so long that he should be regressing necessarily. He just kind of is what he is. Like, ideally a swing tackle, like you said, a solid if unspectacular right tackle whenever he's playing well. And yeah, you would like to get a pick for him, but the way his season ended, like you said, you just can't, like, a team can't justify trading an asset for a guy who was literally told to sit down basically because of what he did, whatever it was that he said or whatever. Like, you can't take a chance on that guy except for as like a minimum, like, vet type of deal that he'll probably get from somebody in the offseason.
Yeah, and I was quietly optimistic that they would be able to do something with that. But you're
Yeah.
right. Like once they benched him for supposed
Whatever.
disciplinary
Right.
reasons, like I think it was a comment that he said,
Yeah.
and when the Steelers were getting blown out or whatever, yeah, that's not going to help your trade
Yeah.
value there. But in a perfect world, you would love to be able to flip that guy for maybe like a 6th-round pick and a
Yeah,
conditional
something.
day
Yeah.
3 pick, because he could have went to a team that needs tackle competition, a potential starter at that spot. And the price would have been right because the Steelers already paid his guarantees. That's besides the point. He's gone now. The Steelers cleared up $10 million with his departure, which was something that was necessary. $8.75 million. His cap number would have been 11.83 million this year. So a good chunk of money. Unfortunately, like on paper, the Steelers are still in the hole. They can get out of that pretty easily with just a couple more moves and clear up substantial cap space. We'll talk about that later in the show, though. Another thing that was interesting came out earlier this week, Shayne, is a report from, I believe this was the trio of NFL Network guys, the insiders from NFL Network. They said that Mason Rudolph reportedly wants a fresh start with the team. I mean, we don't know. Like Mason Rudolph has obviously not come out and commented on this, but it would not be surprising in the least to see that he would want a fresh start. He's been here for a while with the Steelers, knowing that if he comes back, Tomlin has already given an endorsement to Kenny Pickett. They're set to add more quarterback competition. And even without Trubisky, like he had officially obviously passed Trubisky on the depth chart. Now he could go back to being the 3rd-string guy again, depending on who they bring. There's just no incentive for him to come back. And I kind of stated that as soon as the season was over.
Yeah, unless he's told by the team during the offseason as we go through the process that he's going to be brought back specifically to compete for the starting job, there's really no reason for him to come back here unless we happen to offer him the most money, which I doubt would be the case, right? So what he should be doing with what he got, the opportunity that he had at the end of the season, is just trying to cash in on a backup deal somewhere. Like make some good money, go back somebody up. You're not going to get a competition for a starting job anywhere, I don't think. There just isn't openings that are that wide open that, Mason Rudolph's going to come in and take that job. I don't think so, at least. So good for him that he got that opportunity, though, because I do think it's going to lead to a relatively lucrative backup gig somewhere, at least, compared to what he had been making or what he made last year. So, I'm hoping that for him, but you're right. I doubt unless it is a true, like, we want you to come in and compete with Kenny, and that's all that we do outside of maybe drafting like a late round quarterback to be the third quarterback. I don't see the reason why he'd want to come back here.
Yeah, and I think that Rudolph is betting on himself. He had that strong 3-game stretch to close out the season. And so I think there's a solid chance he could be somebody's QB2. I don't think it happens in Pittsburgh because the Steelers spent the draft capital on Kenny Pickett and knowing that they intend to bring in more competition, whether that's a Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett, whatever they want to do there.
We'll talk about that later.
It could push this Rudolph further down the depth chart. And he's been there. He's done that. Doesn't want to do it again, I'm sure, especially when I'm sure he felt that he was the best option on the roster and kind of proved to be that way, at least for a short chunk of time at the end of the season there. One more thing that I wanted to address from the news this week, and that is Field Yates just came out with his mock draft, the ESPN Insider. He has the Pittsburgh Steelers taking Bo Nix, the Oregon quarterback, with the 20th overall pick. Obviously, this ruffled some feathers with the Steeler fan base on Twitter. Shayne, how would you feel about this early in the process here?
So my main issue is for me, I did get through the top 6 quarterback, the consensus top 6 quarterbacks, and Nix did finish 4th for me out of those 6 guys. I did have a late first, early second on him, so this isn't terrible like value in terms of what I think of him as a player. The problem I think is if you're the Steelers, like there's no reason for you to take a swing on a quarterback unless it's somebody who has legit upside, because you have a quarterback in Kenny Pickett that doesn't turn the ball over, that can make some plays here and there. Like you have one of those low ceiling kind of guys. Nix is a better prospect in my opinion by a decent amount than Kenny was. I think he's a better athlete. I think his arm is a little bit better. He makes better decisions overall than Kenny did coming out of college, especially. And so he would be an upgrade in my opinion. The problem is he enough of one when you have a lot of issues and a lot of premium talent probably going to be on the board at corner, at tackle, maybe even interior offensive line. That's my main takeaway from that, is not so much a terrible value, but not maybe the right position to be taking if you are staying at 20.
Yeah, I like your assessment on that, Shayne. And I feel like it's important for fans to not get caught up in the fact that, well, Pickett was the number 1 quarterback in his class, and Nix might be like the 4 or 5 in this class.
Right.
This class is
It's a
way
different
than that 22 class. So, and I agree with you as well. There's no doubt in my mind that Bo Nix would have been the number 1 quarterback had the timeline lined up right. And he had just come off of this Oregon season in 2022 to enter the draft. He would have been picked over Pickett. I don't have any reserves about that.
Yeah, I don't have any
at all. He's just a better, more talented player. He's got better arm talent. His season was phenomenal this year. 51 total touchdowns, 3 interceptions. One of those bounced right off the hands of his receiver. And so an excellent year in terms of big play rate compared to turnover worthy rate. Nobody's arguing with the numbers at all because the numbers game was excellent this year. But like you said, is it enough of an upgrade to take a first round flyer on this? And that's where I would be a little bit leery and maybe a little bit more conservative there. If a guy like this falls to the second round, by all means, like throw a dart.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, but again, like, do we expect that with how many teams need quarterbacks? I think it's more likely Nix goes top 15 than outside the first round at this point. Now things are going to change as we go through the draft process, but yeah, it feels like because of the fact that he is a relatively clean prospect now after his Auburn days are kind of behind him, I have a hard time thinking he'll fall that far, honestly.
Yeah, I do too. And he put together 2 good years. And Shayne, I think in a lot of ways, like these insiders, they hear things, they know what teams like. And I think that the fact that Nix has already been mocked inside the top 20, top 15 before, it shows that teams are probably higher on him than the just the average football fans are right now. So something to keep an eye on. And obviously we always track where Mike Tomlin is, Omar Khan is during the scouting trail. I think that is such a big thing in all of this. And we really had that pick narrowed down this past year. And I think I actually predicted Broderick Jones right there. And Broderick Jones and Joey Porter were like the guys I was going back and forth. They got both of them. So,
I think the 4 most commonly mocked players for me were their first 4 picks of the draft. Well, for 3 at 4,
which is crazy. Yeah, because
it's just we knew, right? Like we knew what they were looking for. So,
they definitely tip their hat to what they're doing. I don't expect that to change as long as Mike Tomlin is here. He makes it very clear what he likes, and other teams do as well. We just don't research them as much as we do for the Steelers, but we will definitely keep an eye if they have interest in the scouting trail in the quarterback department this year, because I think that's going to be very telling. Like if these guys come in for visits, then it's something that we cannot rule out for sure. We will talk about that at a later date here. All right. The Still Curtain podcast is running a deposit match promotion up to $100 for any new daily fantasy user. Make sure you use code FANSIDED2 when signing up to receive your deposit match. Please remember to always game responsibly. Scan the QR code on the screen to see if you qualify. All right, Shayne, let's move on to our big discussion topic of the day. And obviously that's centered around quarterback Justin Fields, because this is a topic that is not going away. We talked about it last week. That was our main topic last week, in fact, but it has heated up since then, Shayne, because now suddenly the Pittsburgh Steelers have the highest odds of landing Justin Fields next year, according to multiple outlets. And the latest that I have up here, NBC Sports Bet, they have Fields at plus 100. I think it was FanDuel Sports had him at minus 125. The odds that Fields would be on the Steelers next year, and DraftKings was at plus 110, if I recall. And so these sports betting outlets now they're putting the Steelers at more likely than the Bears for the team that Justin Fields is going to be on next year. And in some ways, Shayne, it does make sense. I know the Bears are going to move on from him. I think Caleb Williams fell into their lap here.
Point. Yeah.
So I would be shocked if he's not, because it just seems like it's such an easy decision for them to make, to kind of turn the page on one. You get new coaching in the building, and then you're able to draft your guy. And so we're going to look at maybe some of these other teams that may or may not fit Justin Fields. And so maybe we can see a reason as to why the Steelers would be favored so highly in this regard. Do you think that those odds are fair? Like, or do you think that it's just kind of like obscure? Like, who would bet on this kind of stuff?
Right. So for me, I think there's 2 things you look at. There's the Adam Schefter quote on, I think it was McAfee show, where he said like, keep an eye out for the Steelers for Justin Fields. Which, when Adam Schefter says something, regardless of your thoughts on him, and sometimes you can get a little too in the weeds, but generally he obviously knows what's going on around the league, right? Like we know that about him. Another key thing, and we just talked about a second ago, when it comes to like paying attention to who the Steelers are looking at and who they're interested in, we know from that draft class, Mike Tomlin was very interested and very enamored, I would say, with Justin Fields. I think that was pretty clear from the way that he talked about him in the past, the way that he was looking at him in the draft class. Obviously, he was going to go higher than we were taking, so like he obviously probably didn't think it was going to happen. But I think the opportunity to get him now at a lower cost than it would have taken to get him back in the draft, I think it does interest him. Now, whether or not the front office agrees with that, whether or not he has enough, despite it being Mike Tomlin, whether he has enough pull to make that trade, whatever it ends up being, that's what will remain to be seen. But I would be very surprised if they are not actively discussing that with the Bears as we speak.
Yeah, Shayne, you talk about the poll that Mike Tomlin has. Let me fire off a couple names for you. Miles Jack, Allen Robinson, Patrick Peterson, William Jackson, Eric Ebron. These are all guys that Mike Tomlin was infatuated with during the pre-draft process. And when they became available,
guess who got
the price was right enough for him. He went out and got every last one. Every last one proved to be a bad decision, but he did it nonetheless, Shayne.
He did.
Because he liked them so much. And so Tomlin has pull. There's no doubt in my mind he has pull. He honestly, now that Bill Belichick is gone, he probably has more pull than any head coach in the NFL. And I don't think that is a bold statement or anything that way. He's been here so long. He's got the track record. I think the Rooneys give him the flexibility to have his hand like in all these different baskets. And so whether that's a good thing or not, and I think it's not when it comes to the front office side of
generally
things,
speaking, yes, I think
most of the time.
Yeah.
But I do think that he has say in what happens here. And so you look at it and you go back to the 2021 draft. It was easy to see the connection with Tomlin's. He was infatuated with him at Ohio State. There's video of it, even with his interaction with Justin Fields. The likelihood of it, I don't know yet. Still, I think the Steelers probably should be one of the highest teams when it comes to the odds. I don't know if they should be that high. I mean, that's like even odds essentially.
That's pretty telling though of what people think around the league and what Vegas is hearing and what the betting sites are hearing.
It is, and it makes me wonder, like if Schefter and some of these other guys are hearing similar things, like the Steelers are going to make a hard push. And so that brings me to my next point here, Shayne. What will the market look like for Fields? Because I feel like if we kind of go through some of these teams here, there are teams that we can rule out. There's a lot of teams that need quarterbacks, but there's a lot of teams we can rule out. And so let's start with the top of the draft order here, Shayne. Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams fell into the lap. I think you can pencil him in there, barring some like monster trade package or whatever, or the odd chance that they like one of the other quarterbacks better in this class, which I kind of doubt. Washington's picking number 2. That desperate need for a quarterback. Patriots are number 3. Desperate need for a quarterback. I would expect Drake May, maybe Jaden Daniels to go in those selections. Maybe the odd chance of a JJ McCarthy. I'm hearing that NFL teams are much higher on him than what the media is. And so that's a chance for that as well. Arizona's going to stick with Kyler Murray, I think, since they missed out on those top 3 guys. Murray's got the big contract. Go and get him a weapon. The Chargers have Justin Herbert. The Giants could use a quarterback. So does he fit? Is he a big enough upgrade? They're already paying a lot of money to Daniel Jones. Tennessee has Will Levis. Atlanta needs a quarterback, so there's an option right there, and that one is one that makes sense. At least with Arthur Smith, there was a lot of trade talks between Atlanta and Chicago last year about the acquisition potentially of Justin Fields. Bears have their own pick at pick 9, maybe go corner, something like that. There, the Jets have Aaron Rodgers, paying him a lot of money. The Vikings could potentially, depending on what happens, with Kirk Cousins. I mean, it's essentially Cousins' choice, and we'll see how much money he gets thrown at him. If it's not enough, he'll go back to Minnesota, my guess. Denver, potentially, but again, they just made this massive trade for quarterback, spent so much money in draft capital. I don't know if they'd want to do any more of that again. They might stream a quarterback until they draft one. So I feel like if you go down through the list, like there's the Raiders potentially, but I think that they're kind of not in that state. They might want to do something a little bit more permanent there. So I feel like when you go through all of these teams, Shayne, and then some of the other ones that are coming right up on the list, like New Orleans, they have got Derek Carr, paying him a bunch of money. They are going to look for a quarterback, but they probably won't want to pay 2 guys at the same time and give up the draft capital. Indianapolis just drafted their guy. Geno Smith is still in Seattle. Trevor Lawrence is in Jacksonville. And so there aren't a lot of options. Like if you really go down through every single team, it's like the ones that desperately need a quarterback are probably going to draft one. And so that leaves the Steelers, and really like how many other teams are going to be in strong contention to say, yes, Justin Fields is what we need with a strong defense to give us a push right now that would be an upgrade over what we have at the position. I just feel like there aren't a ton.
For me, there's three teams I'm looking at primarily for this, and one of the teams could jump in as well, and it's dependent on what they want to do at three, and that's the Patriots. They're the first domino where if they decide that they don't think that they have the situation in place for a Jaden Daniels or a Drake May
Mhm.
or whoever to come in and succeed immediately, right? Because right now that offense is just plain awful. They need so much talent there and they need so much help. Can you get enough of it while also using the third pick in the draft on a quarterback to make this guy successful early on? I think Gerard Mayo wants to hit the ground running as quickly as possible. I think taking a rookie quarterback and
Yeah.
inserting them into that situation, unless they have a big offseason with being able to acquire weapons, I don't think that rookie quarterback is going to start off his career very well. What you could do if you're them is you just sit, you take Marvin Harrison Jr., or you trade back and take another receiver, something like that. Make sure you hit on one of these top guys that everybody's pretty comfortable with and think they're going to be very
Yeah.
good, right? Get a true weapon. And then maybe you do get a Fields to help bridge that gap because Mac Jones isn't it. Bailey Zappi isn't it. We know that. Fields, maybe he isn't it either, but I think he gives you a chance to win some games early on and get kind of things started and get that offense start to get humming again a little bit. Then you can look for a future quarterback if he ends up not being the guy, right? Like that's the first domino for me. If they do go quarterback, you go to Atlanta. Raheem Morris is the head coach there now. We think he's going to want a big defensive piece to kick things off. I think he's going to want to go an edge rusher most likely. I would say like Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, one of those guys. So pick at 8 might not be a quarterback, and there might not be one there anyway that they want to take. So that would require a trade up. If you go get Fields, you can have a quarterback that is at least a starting caliber player, can help get the ball to these weapons a little bit better than Desmond Ridder did, and gives you that added element with his legs, right? So those are the two teams that I would look at most. And then you, of course, have the Steelers, right? I think we make the most sense from a like looking for an upgrade point. We won't have to give up too much. I don't think. I do think those other teams will be interested, but depending on what they want to do with their first round picks, I think will influence what they want to do at quarterback as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough. Like I think there's a reason why we're the favorites because one, we do have the need. Mike Tomlin liked Justin Fields a lot. He'd be a good schematic fit for this offense for what Arthur Smith does well. There's a reason why before Arthur Smith especially was fired, they were talking about like if he sticks around, Fields would make a lot of sense for that offense. For me, those are the teams that you want to focus on.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. I think that Raheem Morris would love to be able to have that type of quarterback in there in place. The Patriots, though, I feel like I don't know. It'd be hard for me if I was running the Patriots right now. It'd be really hard to say great quarterback class. How often am I picking top 3?
Right.
I can get a Jaden Daniels with 4 years on a rookie contract and a 5th-year option. I think that is way more attractive. And maybe it's
For
not
sure.
Daniels. Maybe May is still there. And so
or whoever
I feel like I feel like they and knowing like their situation too, like they would have to already make this trade for Fields. And then it's like, all right, what if the draft lines up where it's like, oh man, we have a quarterback that we love here, which is trade for Fields. So I feel like it's not hard to see why the Steelers have the best odds because I think there's really only a couple other teams in contention that it would make sense to do. And so just looking at the Steelers stacking up against that, plus 100 odds for the Steelers, according to NBC Sports Bet, plus 150 to stay on the Bears, plus 550 to go to Atlanta, plus 650 to go to New England, and plus 1,200 is the next highest team to go to Las Vegas. And so it's interesting. It's something that we can't ignore, and we're not going to ignore it because there's so much connection here. And even the biggest insiders are now putting these pieces together. And so this is going to be a talking point. It's not going to go away until we find out what the Bears are doing.
Or until
and they have a trade history too. I mean, the Bears got
not a good
last
one,
time,
but not a good one.
But maybe it's the Steelers kind of Omar Khan returning the favor here. Say, hey, we'll get you your 2nd round pick back.
Yeah, right.
It is interesting to note at least. And so, what will trade cost? I think this is what a lot of people are interested in to see what it's going to cost here. And obviously, people are just out on this trade. If it's a 1st round pick, you're out on it. I totally understand that. We've seen 3 years of Fields. We have not seen the year-by-year progression like we would like to see, and it makes me a little bit nervous that he's not going to be that franchise guy because we haven't seen the big enough jump. But you're not getting a 1st-round pick for Justin Fields. I think the Bears understand that. I think other organizations already know that. In the latest projection from Brad Spielberger of Pro Football Focus, He said a 2nd-round pick and a 5th-round pick he believes would get the job done for the Steelers. Shayne, is that something that you would be on board with doing if that was the price tag?
I think it's very tough because if you look at the Steelers' biggest needs, right? It's tackle, corner, center, it's in some order, depending on how you feel about it. And then quarterback is in there, of course, too. But I think the ability to go tackle corner in this class at our first 2 picks is going to be very fruitful if you can do it, right? I think there's going to be at least 1 or 2 tackles left worthy of that pick at 20. I think there's a really deep corner class where you can get a outside guy in the 2nd round that can actually step in and play, and maybe a slot guy later on, or maybe you can focus on that in free agency. So giving up that 2nd would put them in a bind where you would have to have a bigger free agency, in my opinion, to be able to come out of the draft, get into the season, and be ready to go at all the spots that you want to fill, right? So, but the question then too, like we've been talking about, is like, are you going to go into the season with Kenny Pickett as a starting quarterback? Because if you are, how much of it matters, right? Like we don't know at this point. Like we know that we're capable of winning games with him at quarterback. That's not really the question. It's what is it? Does it matter once we get to actually have to go play somebody who is a playoff caliber team, especially if it's probably going to be on the road in the division we're in, right? Where it's winning this division is going to be very hard for a while, right? So you're probably going on the road to a team that has a better quarterback than you. And we just saw it in a Super Bowl where the Niners had multiple opportunities to score, had multiple opportunities to get a lead and just kind of take care of things. The best quarterback in the game, the team that had Patrick Mahomes, ultimately won, despite having a lot of advantages elsewhere on the roster, because he can just do stuff that Brock Purdy can't. And it's not Brock Purdy's fault. It's not the Niners' fault. It's just how it works, right? And then when you have Kenny Pickett and you have to go up against Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes, and Burrow when he's healthy, like you just at some point, no matter how good your roster might be, no matter how good your defense might be, and we still have question marks there even, you need a quarterback that can do something beyond the confines of the offense, that can make something of themselves and of the play. Justin Fields has that capability. Now, he hasn't done it enough consistently. He hasn't done it enough for me to say, okay, this guy is definitely like a bona fide top 15 guy even, right? But we all know that this offense would be significantly more fun to watch, if nothing else, and probably more productive with Fields under center than a Pickett or a Ryan Tannehill or whoever it is. So worth it? I think it just depends on what your plan is for him. Like, is it going to be to bring him in, give him the 5th-year option, let him play out the next 2 years? And if he's good enough, you're probably going to have to pay him, right? And that's where things get scary for me. It's not so much the first 2 seasons where you get to kind of let him play on a relatively cheap deal for a quarterback. It's what happens after that. Does he show you enough to get that 2nd contract? Does he show you enough where you're kind of in between, where like we don't want to have to restart a quarterback because we're picking 22nd, because of course we are, but we can't really pay him because we can't afford. Like I feel like you could end up putting yourself into a different kind of purgatory, but purgatory nonetheless.
Yeah, and I think that that's what you have to weigh, Shayne, right? Like, what are the options here? If not Fields, you can't run it back with Kenny Pickett. In my opinion, I don't think that there's nearly enough firepower there. I know that there are Steelers fans that disagree with me, but when you have 13 touchdowns in 25 NFL games and a 78 passer rating in 2 years, like that's just not enough. And you mentioned it, like I think it can get the Steelers to the playoffs because it already happened essentially with Kenny Pickett and a combination of Trubisky and Rudolph at the end of the season. But once you get into the postseason, is that going to be enough? I feel like Fields, if he were to have the ability to be consistent enough for like a 3 to 4 game stretch, he has the big play making ability. The defense could be good enough. He could obviously run and move the ball with his legs if he needs to. That it's intriguing to me at the very least. And I would not touch it with a 1st round pick, but it becomes a lot more interesting. We're talking a 2nd and a 5th, maybe 2nd and a 4th, something like that. If that's what it ends up being, Shayne, I'm at least intrigued by the idea. Now people will ask, well, it's not just that. You're going to have to turn around and pay him. Yes and no. I mean, you will, but you'll have a 2-year sample to
find out first if you want to do that. Yeah.
So essentially what it's going to be, Shayne, is it's going to be like a 2 years for a grand total of like $25 million. And Joe, I just want to put that
quarterback.
Let's put it into perspective here. And so Daniel Jones making $40 million a year right now. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Justin Fields is a better quarterback than Daniel Jones. And you want to talk about bad contracts. I mean, Derek Carr making $37.5 million per year value. Ryan Tannehill, his contract was just voided, but $29.5 million for an old Ryan Tannehill, who they just drafted his replacement. Now that contract was given to him years ago, but it's like,
he was much better
guys
player,
get
still,
paid.
yeah.
I mean, these quarterbacks, if you are a somewhat competent quarterback, you get paid. Like, is it hard to imagine him playing much worse than the Brown sample that we've seen from Deshaun Watson, who is getting $46 million a year, 100% fully guaranteed? And so when you compare it to what other quarterbacks around the league are getting, Shayne, knowing that you can get him 2 years for $25 million, it's actually pretty enticing. And I feel like obviously you're going to have to make a decision after that 5th year option, going into that 5th year option. If he's played and shown enough, then you had to decide, is he worth throwing a ton of money at? And if the answer is no, well, what's the worst case scenario here? You get an upgrade over Kenny Pickett. You get him for 2 years. If you decide on that 5th year option, and you do it at a reasonably cheap rate. So but at the cost of a 2nd round pick and change. And so it's not the end of the world. It's not like you're mortgaging the whole future.
No, this isn't like a franchise altering move regardless, probably. Like, I think the problem is the upside is certainly there. The downside is there, but neither one to me are like this catastrophic up or down, right? I think the upside is like, maybe you get a more consistent version of Fields and he can be a consistent, like, top 15 quarterback, which then again, a top 15 quarterback is essentially a $40 million man now, right? Like, you're going to be paid $40 million if you're kind of consensus top 15. But the downside is obviously you give up a valuable pick that might that could have turned into something for your team. And then he flames out and then you don't have a quarterback still. Like, that's the downside, but that's probably going to happen anyway, realistically. As much as I would love Kenny to figure it out all of a sudden and to show that he was a 1st round pick for a reason, I can't bank on that. And I know you can't bank on that. I don't think the Steelers can bank on that, right? Like, no one can really sit here and say that right now. And we had a couple of comments actually about the situation. So go get Cousins. We're going to talk about other options here shortly. So we'll mention him for sure, Eric here. And then, of course, our friend R. Barley 18 here. Steelers have inquired about Howell and Ritter both. I wish they would look into Hooker in Detroit. So I know that during the draft process, they were looking at Howell and Ritter, I'm sure, just because they were looking at all the quarterbacks, but not interested in either of those at this point. And then Hendon Hooker, I didn't care for him coming out, mostly because he played in about as fake of an offense as you possibly can. And I think that he's a great, like, sit still and just throw the ball to somebody player, but I don't think he does much else. He said as well, you could get Fields for 15, 17. I wish, that'd be great.
Yeah.
He's going to make double that minimum, even if he's only okay. That's the thing.
Even if he is only okay, we know the going rates. We have them in front of us. We can see what other guys are making. And even like Jimmy Garoppolo, who's like a bottom of the barrel starting level quarterback, $24.5 million a year. And it goes up all the time with each new contract. So
unfortunately,
I don't see him going for that cheap.
Yeah. And then Phil's downside is better than what Kenny's. That's totally, you could definitely make that argument as far as what he's done. His downside is still better than Kenny. I think the problem is not so much whether it's an upgrade. Like, we're not discussing that at this point. Like, we know that, at least as far as, most people are concerned, that's what it is, right? Like, he's an upgrade for sure, even if he's just what he's been. The question I think for a lot of people is, what could he be? And I think that's like, what would the expectations, and this is what we want to talk about too, like, what would the expectations realistically be for Fields if he came here? And I know you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, and I think that there's one scenario, and I only see one, in which trading for Justin Fields would turn out to be worse than what you had in the last 2 years in Kenny Pickett, and that is the turnovers. And I think
that is an issue.
If the turnovers just absolutely crush you and you can't make it up for it defensively, like he's had a bunch of fumbles in his career, he's had 30 interceptions. So in that regard, he's not as clean as what Pickett is, but the playmaking ability is much, much higher. And I think that's where I think it would make up for itself. Now, there might be a game or two where he has that like Trubisky level game where it's like, you don't throw a touchdown, you throw 3 picks and you cost your team the game. Like, I can see a game or two like that happening, but at the same time, there are going to be other games where he goes out and he showcases his ability that, and the Steelers can score more than 17 points with him, I think, in the lineup theoretically. Now, the Bears obviously didn't have a great offense either, but the Steelers are a better franchise. They're a more talented team overall. You can rely on your defense, which means that Fields can just run the ball a lot. And even that would be a trait to have, pair that with a good running game that's already in Pittsburgh. And so there is some level of intrigue there for sure. So my expectations for Fields would be, first of all, the Steelers would be a comparable or better team than they were last year. I don't see that scenario happening, and that odd chance that they're worse and Fields just throws a bunch of interceptions or whatever. He'll throw
we'll just see
the
Kenny
4 or
come in
6
if that
Pickett
happens.
does. But
You know what I mean? Like they'll right the ship by doing that if they had to, if it's that bad.
They would, and I think that they would just admit defeat at that point. But I do think that their team would be better. Now, record-wise, maybe a win better, maybe a playoff win better. I don't think it makes them Super Bowl contenders unless Fields were to just like light it up in year 4, get that fresh start on a new organization. But the team should be better around him. The talent, hopefully the Steelers patch those holes in the offensive line, which again, people are going to say, well, if you give Kenny the opportunity with Arthur Smith, I just don't think I've never liked Kenny's traits. Like this is my problem from the beginning. I had Pickett as my 48th overall player in that draft. Now I might be very wrong on Fields, but if I go back to my 2021 big board, Fields is my 2nd overall player behind Trevor Lawrence. I liked him a lot. Like he was the highest dual threat quarterback to ever come out of college football, according to 24/7 Sports. So there was a lot of reason to like him. He has some Josh Allen like tendencies to his game where he can throw tacklers off him in the backfield, scramble on for 5 seconds and chuck the ball 65 yards and drop it in a bucket. He doesn't do it consistently enough. And if we're able to be a little bit more consistent in that department, you have the big play and tools to potentially make a playoff push and go toe to toe with some of these guys. If you were able to take a significant step forward, which again, the evidence shows that going from year 3 to year 4, you're not going to take that jump that we're hoping for. And so that is the scenario that's is a little bit disheartening right there. But at the same time, I would expect the Steelers to be a better team. I would expect them to score more points per game. We'd probably move that needle from the 17-point mark, maybe up to like 22 points a game, which for the Steelers, if you're scoring 22 and you're only allowing 18 or 19, I mean, that's enough to make you a contender potentially right there, depending on how well you can perform in the postseason. So I do think that they take a significant step forward if they move from Pickett to Justin Fields. What about you?
I think it's really tough because part of me wants to be realistic about it. And like you said, and just be like a jump in points, more effective offense, probably more turnovers, but you take those with more touchdowns. You take those with more opportunities to score, that type of thing. However, I will say that the thing that really kind of makes it most interesting to me is I think of the offensive coordinators in the league that are not like the top tier echelon ones, right? So not like the McVays of the world that are head coaches and Shanahan's and Reeds and stuff. There's probably not a better schematic fit for Fields than what Arthur Smith wants to do. Because you think, one, the running game is a focus. So I'm sure he'd want to involve him in the running game. I'm sure he has the ability to do that. Even Ryan Tannehill sometimes did carry the ball in like a read option scenario for him when he was the offensive coordinator, when he had more wheels to him. You know, Tannehill was a former receiver, so he had some athleticism. But like he did that stuff with him. I'm sure he could do the same thing with Fields. Fields' scrambling ability obviously is part of it too. And he has a simplified passing game that, yes, isn't what we wanted coming to Pittsburgh. We wanted a more developed passing game, but a simplified passing game that has a lot of play action to it, a lot of heavy sets. You could throw the ball down the field with Fields very well. He does that very well, amongst other things, as a passer. It makes sense from a scheme fit too. And I think that's part of why the odds are so high for him, because obviously Vegas is going to be looking at things like what would make the most sense for a team to do. Schematically, Fields is the best option that isn't going to be like a Cousins or someone like that that's just a better quarterback overall, right? He's the best option on the market for what the Steelers are trying to do offensively, minus maybe the turnover stuff. But I think in a Smith scheme, the turnovers probably aren't as much of an issue because he's not going to be forced into making decisions that maybe he just isn't good at. Like he's not going to read the field very well, right? I just don't think that's ever going to be part of his game. But in Smith's offense, you don't have to do that all the time. Really, it's not as much of a prerequisite to be successful for him to be able to do those things. They're going to scheme stuff up for him. They're going to create open space. They're going to create play action opportunities. I think it would make a lot of sense from that point of view as well. And I think that the expectations should actually probably be a little bit higher than even what you were saying because of the scheme fit. Like if he comes in and only scores 22, 23 points a game, with the talent we do have that we've accumulated, especially in the running game, I think the offensive line should be much better, especially if we do use that first pick on a tackle or whoever it is. I would actually be pretty disappointed if we don't take a pretty significant leap in scoring, especially.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. I mean, I would expect so too. And I was erring on the side of caution because I know the Steelers, I mean, even you go back to Randy Fichtner, there's a year they scored 26.6 points a game. And so I think there's potential to score higher than that. And so just looking on the cautious side of things, I think that it would, at the very least, it is a significant step up from what the Steelers have right now, for sure. Do you have a chat you want to get to?
I was just throwing some up here about like you saying let's
Okay.
not like act like Mooney and Herbert were great sporting guys. Yeah, Mooney had a rough year, unfortunately. I really liked him for a while there. He's probably going to be going somewhere else and trying to rebuild his career. But yeah, I mean, Fields, he had talent, especially this past year on his team. Just not I wasn't a cohesive unit ever with the Bears, right?
Yeah.
They were never good at any one thing for long enough to get a great feel for him. I do still think a lot of his issues are his own. I do think there are legitimate concerns that we're going to be there regardless of the supporting cast. But I do think the Steelers will be better set up to allow him to succeed because of, one, the coaching that he'd be getting here, the offense system he would be in, all that stuff. So I will say, no, not going to be surprised if he ends up here, if he plays the best of his career. It'd be very surprising if he didn't. So
yeah, absolutely. And DJ Moore is no slouch, obviously. I mean,
no,
that's
but
a bona
yeah,
fide number one.
he was the reason
but
he
it was
had
just,
a better passing year overall when he was out there. So
I agree. And so I think this is a good segue to talk about what are the better options out there. If not Fields, like let's weigh this compared to what could potentially happen. And let's talk about Fields compared to some of the options. So again, Fields versus Pickett. You and I said that obviously Fields is going to give you the best chance to not only make the playoffs, but potentially make a push if those are my two options. And I think that most would agree with us on that one. So let's weigh him compared to some of these others. The best free agent option out there, undeniably, is Kirk Cousins.
yeah, without a doubt.
He does not have any incentive to go back to Minnesota unless he just isn't getting the money he's looking for. I know that Minnesota is and has been willing to pay him a lot on those franchise tags. And so if he gets enough money thrown at him, he can sign with another team. Now, again, he's at the stage of his career. Does he want to come to Pittsburgh when he's got a family, that kind of stuff? I mean, those are all things that he would have to weigh. Theoretically, though, if the Steelers were able to fork up enough and get enough salary cap space. And again, there's ways about doing this. It's not like the Steelers need $50 million in space this year. They could backload a contract. They could add on portable years.
They could make some fake contract offer for sure.
And I fully expect them to do that. Like if they were to get a Kirk Cousins, I would fully expect them to backload the contracts like they always do and tack on some voidable years to extend out that cap hit. You could make a case, Shayne, that maybe that is the best option because Cameron Hayward's going to be 35. TJ Watt turns 30 during the season this year. This window is closing where they could have this elite defense potentially. And so maybe that is the option to go and get an old guy, albeit coming off an Achilles injury, but one who has had a 100 plus pass rating 3 of the last 4 years and was on the pace for another solid statistical season again this year before the injury. And so that one would cost a lot of money. So it's different than Fields. Like Fields is a lot cheaper financially. Like I said, 2 years, 25 million roughly.
Even you would have the draft assets, but still, yeah.
Yeah. And the draft assets, I feel like overall, the package with Fields is still cheaper.
It is, yeah.
Because a second and a day 3 pick with some money is not nearly as much as handing out like $50 million a year.
Right.
That's going to be, and he's going to want a lot of that guaranteed. And so that one is going to be, it's going to be hard to attain that one. I do think now I will ask you, Shayne, is that a better option? Does it make the Steelers a better team right now than Fields?
Yeah, because Cousins is a proven commodity for sure. Like you know what you're getting out of him, assuming his Achilles feels good. And he's like, I don't think I saw no drop off from him as a thrower of the football last year. You know, as long as, again, if he's healthy, I have no doubt that he's the best available quarterback option, right? Now, I will say, with our offensive line, if we can't solve the tackle situation opposite of Roger Jones, or if Roger Jones doesn't take a leap, or if we can't solve the center problem, my biggest gripe when Kirk Cousins was signed to the Vikings was not so much whether I thought Kirk was a good player or even necessarily worth the money, although especially nowadays, like the money doesn't matter with quarterbacks. It's just, do you think they're good? If they're good, then whatever you're paying them is probably fine. Like that's just kind of what it is, unfortunately. But my concern was I didn't think they had the setup necessary to get him to the playoffs and succeed into them, like to succeed late into them. The reason he was signed was because Case Keenum got them all the way to the title game, and he couldn't get it done, and they wanted an upgrade over that situation. And they never made it that far again, not because Cousins isn't better than Case Keenum, especially now, but was at the time. It's because they just didn't have an offensive line to protect him. Keenum had that escapability, that mobility, the ability to make plays in the run. Kirk just doesn't really do that. And it's not his game, and he's been very successful without that. but you have to be able to protect him. It's the same thing with Jared Goff in Detroit, right? They have this awesome offensive line now. They have all these weapons. His biggest weakness as a player is much more of a non-factor for them than it was for even the Rams. It is for some other teams that have those types of quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Because they knew that. They understood, okay, we have to build this team a certain way because of who our quarterback is. And it worked out for them. They got away the title game this year, and they're going to probably be in contention for a while now, even with Goff. With Cousins, I don't know if we can do that fast enough. Like, are we going to be ready to create that environment for him? Because if not, especially now with an Achilles injury where he's probably going to lose even a little bit of his mobility he had, is he going to be able to stay upright enough to make the impact that he should?
I think that's an incredibly fair point because the Steelers do have two gaping holes on their offensive line. In knowing that Cousins had no mobility to begin with, like it's not going to get any better.
It's not getting better
at this stage of your career.
So
the question always comes, and I think this has always been the case with Cousins, is when you get into the postseason, can you go toe to toe with the best in the business, knowing that an entire element of your game is missing with that mobility factor, the ability to extend the play. Now, within the pocket, within timing, I think he's one of the best quarterbacks out there.
Not many better just sitting in the pocket.
So it would just be about, can the Steelers offer him that protection, and can you pair him with a good enough defense to potentially get over that hump? Like if you were to get matched up in back-to-back weeks in the playoff against Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, can you do it twice in a row? Like that would be the question when it comes to him. But I think both you and I would agree we would take that over Fields. It just comes down to the finances there. Would the Steelers be willing to do something like that? Yeah. So now if we move on to these other free agent options though, Shayne, here's the list based on their yearly values on the most recent contracts of these guys hitting the market now. Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett. I think those are both guys that are in play. They would fit what Arthur Smith likes to do. They both have plenty of experience. And then you go, look, Mitchell Trubisky, not coming back, just got rid of him. Tyrod Taylor, Marcus Mariota, Sam Darnold, still young, makes some bad decisions with the football. Jameis Winston, Baker Mayfield is going back, so that one's not an option. He's going to get paid a lot of money too. Drew Lock, Gardner Minshew is one that would be interesting, but again, it's like, how much do you have to pay for that? And is it a big enough upgrade over Kenny Pickett? Was it more Shane Steichen? I think that Minshew has been a solid player. Like as a backup,
Minshew is really he's like the 33rd best quarterback in the NFL.
That's how I've always felt about him as well.
He's technically starting caliber in my opinion. If you want to think about it too hard, but you don't want him to be your starter if you can avoid it.
Yeah,
right? Like that's kind of where I'm at with him. But
yeah, and I mean, you go down the list. Teddy Bridgewater's retired now, isn't he?
Yes, he retired.
He just retired. So Tyler Huntley, we've seen enough of him. And Joe Flacco, 40 years old next year.
Hey, just make the rounds in the AFC North now that you're 39.
Make the I mean, I just feel like the further you go down the list, like these are like they're really more of QB3 options. Like you bring Josh Dobbs back, that kind of thing. So the options are very slim. Now you can look at the draft side of things, Shayne. Would you be willing to move up in the draft? So let's say theoretically that second and fifth that you would spend to get a Justin Fields trade, maybe you package that with your first round pick. Is that worth a McCarthy? Is that worth potentially? Let's say Drake May falls to like 7 or 8, like slides a little bit in the draft.
But yeah.
Would you give up 2 first round picks? Is giving up 2 first round picks for May, 2 firsts and a third, whatever, is that better than a second and a fifth for Fields?
I think so. I did see some conversation about, depending on where the league falls on Daniels, if he were to make it past 3. That is an interesting thing because I think Daniels would also be a great fit in this offense, especially because even though I think he's in my opinion, I think he's a better prospect than Fields even was, honestly. Like that's where I'm at. He's my QB. He's my QB2 right now. So for me, I would do it for him. Even May, the thing with May that worries me a little bit is there's a little bit of like this, not Trubisky by any means, because I don't want to make the North Carolina comparison, but when I watched him, there's a couple times where he did not see that middle level of the field. Like defenders in that area just were blind to him, and he threw to guys that were not open, right? Like they just straight up were not open because of an underneath defender. That type of stuff worries me, especially when we're talking about a guy that is a taller quarterback that should be able to see those things, that should be able to ID guys underneath. I worry a little bit about that early on. Like I'm sure you can kind of get coached up on that stuff, but on this team, if you're turning the ball over and you're not creating enough big plays, like that could get ugly pretty quickly. But if a quarterback if one of the top 3 falls far enough, it absolutely makes more sense to do that than try to trade for Fields, because again, you're getting a rookie contract, a 5th-year option, a guy that probably all 3 of these guys are at least on par, if not better than him as prospects, like as he was as a prospect. So you're getting similar value talent-wise for a much cheaper cost. Like, of course, the same reason the Bears are going to take Caleb Williams is because they have the first overall pick. And even if they think Fields is a good player, if they don't think he's going to be a great player, then why are you sitting here doing this anymore, right? Like, that's why he's probably going to be available. So I do, of course, think you should do that if you can. And I think the other backups, like Tannehill, I just think he's washed at this point, unfortunately for him. Like, he'd be a good guy to bring in for a little while for the offense's sake, like, because he knows it. But he shouldn't be playing, in my opinion. Jacoby Brissett's probably a better player than Pickett, but I don't really care because he's in his 30s and doesn't have any upside.
Yeah, there's just no upside with those. One of those guys.
Like Tyrod Taylor, I would love to be a Steeler just because I like him personally, but and also if you were to draft like a rookie quarterback in like the mid rounds, he probably would end up getting hurt, and then the rookie would come in and be great because that's what happens to him everywhere he goes. So like even like we even had a mini version of that with Tommy DeVito of all people, had a little bit of a run after Tyrod got hurt because he had to come in for Daniel Jones. Like, that stuff happens to him. So maybe if you want to get some luck, maybe bring him in and hope he gets hurt or something. But outside of those guys, like the rest of the veterans just aren't either not as good as Pickett, in my opinion, or aren't enough of an upgrade for it to matter even for a year.
Yeah, and for any fans out there saying, oh, the Steelers just drafted a first-round quarterback, you can't afford to go up and do that. I'm like, there's nothing more important, first of all. I mean, if you don't have a quarterback, you can't compete. Secondly, this team was willing to trade a first, second, a third in 2019 to go up and get a 5'11" linebacker with 1 year of experience at a position that is not valued in today's NFL. And so if you're willing to spend that much capital to go get a player you like, you better be willing to do double that to go get a quarterback.
Yeah. Well, admittedly, Khan probably wouldn't have done that if he was in charge at the time, I would assume. But still, he knows that we've done this for less valuable pieces.
Probably not. I'm so sick of like the short-sighted drafting stuff that just made me want to pull my
Kevin
hair
Colbert
out
came out today and said that he like was mad about analytics guys in the organization. Like, of course you were mad about it.
I saw that. That's it irks me because like those last 6 years of Kevin Colbert were so bad. Like, with the exception of some of the picks in the 2017 class, obviously you got TJ there, but since that point it was awful. And so I feel like everything that they did was just, that's a topic for a different day. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. I'll just keep ranting on about that. And so I feel like the one other area we can weigh this against Fields, Shayne, would be, so I think both you and I would like the Kirk Cousins thing. We would like the Jaden Daniels, Drake May, hypothetically, like if they fell far enough, we would give up more draft capital to do that than we would trade for Fields, obviously. The last one that I think is on the table here would be day 2 pick this year. Like weighing Fields against maybe a Michael Penix in the 2nd round, maybe a Spencer Rattler in the 3rd round. And so would you rather have one of those guys on a rookie deal, completely unproven, to see what they are, having the mystery element behind it, knowing that they don't have to come in right away? Maybe that's part of the problem, though. Or would you rather go out and get Justin Fields with that capital?
I mean, if we're just talking about win potential, you do Fields. I think Penix, for me, I ended up with a 2nd, 3rd round grade on him because of the combination of medicals and just, I don't think he can extend plays at all. Like, I legitimately think that if the play breaks down, it's over for him. And in the NFL, when you cannot do that, like when you don't show me any real ability to escape a bad play in some way, shape, or form, whether it's your pocket presence or your ability to scramble or to move, I have a hard time thinking you're going to last long. And even if you can, it's going to take a very specific situation, which I just don't think the Steelers have. It's kind of the same reason why Cousins, although he'd be the best option, might not be what we want him to be because of the situation. And then Rattler, if you take a flyer on him in the 3rd or 4th, I think that's fine. But I think that should be in combination with upgrading with either Fields or someone else, because I don't think he's going to be the guy necessarily. So,
yeah, I think that makes sense at all. And it's like, I would have liked to see like another Quinn Ewers or somebody in this draft. There's more chances to throw darts at a day 2 quarterback potentially. So the options are relatively limited there, and it might not be anything that helps you right now. And that's kind of the problem. the Steelers are facing. Like they need an upgrade now. Like you don't want to waste any more of this.
That's the issue.
This TJ Watt window.
Yeah, you don't have many years to play around. Like you have to, whatever you do at quarterback should be with not necessarily with the future in mind, unless it's a rookie that is good enough to also help you now, right? Like if it's one of those, that's fine, but it can't be like this in between type of deal.
Exactly. And I think we're going to have lots of time. We'll touch on the quarterback situation a lot more because, again, this is the biggest topic for the Steelers going into this offseason. There's nothing more important than the quarterback position. And so we'll see if they get that figured out and what they decide to do there. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate your support. We're almost to that 500 mark.
Almost
Help us get there,
500,
please. If you're listening and you're enjoying, please tell your friends about it. We'd love to bring you as much content as possible, multiple shows a week, ideally. So please subscribe to the podcast. And if you are here joining us in the live chat today, drop your questions for us that you might have. I know we might run a little bit of a longer show, but we'll touch on this last topic really quickly here, Shayne, because we did spend so much time on Fields today. And we'll see what happens, because I would almost expect that by next week we would hear about some more roster moves, just knowing how aggressive the Steelers are being early in this process. Already releasing Trubisky, Chukwuma Okorafor, and Presley Harvin III. So now my question, Shayne, is which players could be released, restructured, extended, and when can we start hearing about these things? Like, what do you think is the next wave of roster moves to come for the Steelers?
I think the next one that would make the most sense is Allen Robinson, because he's the easiest, like no-brainer, got to be off the team move that you can make, right? And again, like we kind of knew that Robinson was probably kind of done. Like we just knew that, but you can save like $10 million against the cap by releasing him. Like, and it just makes too much sense. That move should get us under the cap at that point, I think, from what we've done so far. And then after that, if not, it's going to be close, and then you can start working on some other stuff. So he's definitely the first one. I think the next guy you look at, just because one, the emergence of Keanu Benton, and probably going to have some options in the free agency or even later in the draft. Ogunjobi just he wasn't worth his money last year, right? Like it's just plain and simple. It's too bad. I thought his first year in Pittsburgh was okay, at least good enough to be like, I understand bringing him back when you're trying to go on a run and everything. I think that getting him off the team, even if you do have to take a bit of a cap hit and a bit of a dead cap hit, I think his dead cap would be about $7 million, but I think you could save a few million off that as well. So like that would save you a little bit of money and get you out of that contract. Those are the two that come to mind like immediately. Peterson is a weird one, because like if he's going to play some safety for us, if he's going to move around and not have to play outside, I could see him bringing value still, but that is really dependent on what we do in free agency and the draft. If you can replace his role without really spending money on it, then I do think he should be a cut candidate as well. Restructure wise, like you can always move money around. Like Cam's contract, I think, is one that they're going to have to do something with a little bit just to save themselves some money. I know he said he's not going to take like a pay cut. I don't blame him. He's earned his money, but doing something with the deal to make it a little bit more palatable, I think is definitely going to have to happen too.
Yeah, Cam and Minka, they both have cap numbers of over $21 million.
Yeah, Minka can definitely get some money moved around too, for sure.
And I know that Minka is still awesome, and he had the two big injuries last year. That's a lot of money for a safety. A safety in today's game, the quick passing game, where their impact is more minimal than it has been,
especially a guy
lifetime, essentially.
That is so, like, his value is so based on his ability to be a middle of the field deep safety. Like his best football has been played when he can just roam the middle of the field, take away deep shots, intercept the football, make plays on the ball. And he'll do that still if we give him the opportunity. I think last year we just didn't really have the ability to do that for him, even when he was healthy. But again, like now that we are getting more and more away from downfield passing game and straight shots down the middle of the field, big and like those plays just aren't as common anymore, because teams know like it's just easier to throw the short game. I mean, look at Patrick Mahomes, right? Like when he had Tyreek Hill and all those guys, like he was bombing it because he could. Defenses adjusted. You saw a lot more quarters. You saw a lot more like too high. Like it just, once that happened, he's like, all right, fine, I'll pick you apart underneath. And more even elite quarterbacks are doing that because it's easier to do that.
Yeah, and it doesn't make Minka any worse of a player. It just
neutralizes his impact a little
bit.
As much as it could be, for sure. Yeah.
So I definitely see them doing a restructure with Minka, pushing some of that money back for
Mhm.
Cam. I think maybe an extension to take him through the rest of his
Yeah,
career,
whether it's like a
tack on voidable
void
years,
thing or
maybe.
something
I'm
like
not a
that.
fan of the voidable years,
Yeah,
honestly,
if you
Shayne.
can avoid it for sure, but yeah, this team, I
Because
don't know.
everybody says, "Oh, the salary cap is a myth." Well, you're going to be eating that for several
Ask
years
the
into the
Saints if
future.
it's a myth because they committed to Derek Carr for 2
Exactly.
years basically by default because of what they had to do with their
Well,
cap.
and it's not only that, I think if used properly and at the right time,
It's
for
great.
example, like the Rams a few years back, like you want to tack on voidable years when you have a legitimate championship window, you've
Mhm.
got a top 7 or 8 quarterback, all that kind of stuff. I'm good with that. But
For
when
sure.
you naively do it thinking that you're a championship team and you are not, that's when
Yeah.
I draw the line to say, okay, let's not make these decisions that are going to hurt us in the future
Yeah.
for a naive chance right now to go all the way. And so, I mean, it's a fine line there. You talked about Ogunjobi. Yeah, only 6.2 million in cap savings, but I would do it anyway because
Yeah.
he's not very good.
It's just he's not a
So
valuable defender right
no,
now.
he
You can use
hasn't
that
been
money
half the
elsewhere.
player the Steelers were hoping to get in
Yeah.
terms of his pass rush ability, just overall play. Like I think that he's been pretty underwhelming. He gets
Armand
moved
Watts
easily
is
in the run
better.
game. Well, I might take Watts. I mean, straight up, honestly, I think that Watts on a
He
per
might just
snap
be
basis
better.
was
Yeah.
just a better player last year.
Yeah, so bring
Now,
him
the
back.
other interesting thing you can do with Ogunjobi, you can designate him a post June 1st cut.
Yes, you could.
And
Yeah.
so by doing that, you can save 9.75 million, which is a bigger chunk there.
Yeah.
It's just, do you want to wait for that
Right.
number to come
Like,
in?
do you need that extra couple million enough to do it right away
Mhm.
in free agency, or can you wait and save more money down the road?
And they
That's
might.
really
They've
what it
always
is.
been kind of impatient that
Yeah,
way.
they
So
are. They are.
the Allen Robinson one is the easiest one. And
For
I
sure.
said the easiest of all of them, even the 3 cuts that
Yeah.
were already made, he's easier
Might be
than
the
those
easiest
because
cut in the league, unfortunately for him.
$11.83 million cap hit Steelers can save $10 million instantly for a guy who was just not good last year. I don't care how sure-handed the guy is.
Glorified
Can't get open.
fullback at
He
times.
can't run after the catch. And I think it was 4.7 yards per target. Like you are
Something
better
like
off dumping
that.
the ball to a backup running back out of the backfield. So
Yeah.
it just was not efficient at all. He's got to be gone. And I'm kind of curious as to why they didn't cut him already in that first wave. Is it just I don't know. Like, and especially like if they want to do the due diligence to a veteran, like, oh, go ahead and scour the market, whatever. Are they thinking about bringing him back? Like, are they
Listen,
thinking about cutting him and saying, we're going to cut you and re-sign you at a cheap deal or something?
The only thing I'll say is that because it's Arthur Smith's offense, that he was a glorified fullback at times for us, right?
Mhm.
Like they kind of used him as the lead blocker in some scenarios. And I wonder if maybe Arthur was like, oh, well, hold on a minute. This guy might be good for doing this. Like, that's great, Arthur. You could get Juwan Jennings for probably less than $10 million. No offense. Like he's a really good player, but he's not a like receiver in the sense he's not going to catch 60 balls. And so like, but he's really good at what he does. So you could probably just take that money and give it to him. I'd rather you do that. Like, so I hope that's not the case, but that there's a little bit of me that's like,
the cap number is insane, Shayne. They're not going to go if they bring him back, they're going to cut him essentially
and then resign. Yeah, it would have to be some sort of
you can't bring him back with an $11.8 million cap hit for a bad football player. So, but yeah, it does scare me a little bit. Like, I like you as a blocker. So
it's great. Arthur, awesome.
There are options out there.
So do that. Yeah.
No, I think that those are the big ones. We'll touch on those. I think maybe an outside chance that Mason Cole, although I can see them liking him as like a backup, like a swing interior
that's
backup.
The thing. It's like, are they willing to just let him stay on the roster to be like the emergent, like the safety net in case like they can't get another center or the center they draft, if they draft one, just isn't ready or injured, whatever. Like that's still probably more likely to me just because his number isn't egregiously bad. If it was like 9-10 million, for sure he's gone. But because it's not, like I think it's totally possible he's on the roster to start the year.
Yeah, I think that it is as well, and thank goodness that Levi Wallace's contract has expired. So that was a fun experiment. Didn't end very well. So
no offense to Levi. Good job as an undrafted free agent, but get out of here.
Exactly. Yep. He's had a great career as an undrafted free agent, but it did not go swimmingly for the Steelers this past year. I think that's probably a long enough show. Anything else you want to get to today?
No,
Shayne?
we'll have more to talk about. Hopefully next week we'll start hearing some more stuff. Combine's going to be ramping up here soon. The list came out. We're looking at that, and we're going to talk about some guys next week, hopefully on our Tuesday show, which I do want to do next week, talking about some guys to watch out for once we get to that combine as well. So,
all right, that sounds good. Then we go live every Wednesday on YouTube at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. We're also often live Tuesdays on Tuesday's show when the show that Shayne hosts. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.